Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Lee, the US technology correspondent here at Bloomberg, live in New York. Joining me this morning for this live stream is Catherine Thorbeck. She's in Tokyo. She's our Asia technology columnist. Catherine, how are you?
I'm doing well, Dave. Happy to be here.
Great. And also in London is Parmi Olsen, who's our EU tech columnist. There, Parmi, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Dave.
Nice one. Well, over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, obviously. What else are we talking about these days? And this week at Bloomberg Opinion, we have had something of an AI extravaganza. We've launched a special project seeking to ask some of the big questions about artificial intelligence, specifically some of the questions that affect normal people, me and you, in our daily lives. We know what Sam Altman wants of AI. We know what all these big companies want, but we want to get to some of the questions that affect ordinary, regular people. The centerpiece of that, which you can see on your screen right now, is our AI identity quiz. You can find a link to it in our bio, but please stay with us because we're going to go through this quiz together on this stream. And the idea of it was to sort of help people understand their own views about AI, you know, how they feel about its use in education, or how they feel about how it's going to change the world of work, and also how it's going to affect mental health. And we're going to be talking about that in some detail later, particularly based on some comments that Sam Altman made just this week, which we found very, very interesting. So let's get to it. You can see it on the screen, and we're going to go through these and hopefully disagree maybe on some of these finer points of the AI future. And what you do get at the end of this quiz, by the way, is a kind of summary of your view. So you may be a doomer, someone that thinks AI is either a waste of time or is going to cause more trouble than it's worth. Or you might be a pro-human idealist. That's what I got, which basically says, you know, you think this could be a good thing. We've got to be pretty careful about it. There's 6 different personas. So I do urge you to try that and see what you get. But we're going to begin. We don't have time to go through all of them, sadly, but we're going to pick out a few. We're going to begin with this one, which I thought was particularly interesting. And it says, within 10 years, do you think AI will, and these are the options, eliminate the job you have now, create more jobs than it eliminates, replace most repetitive tasks, and be smarter than most experts in specialist fields? You could select them all. You could select none of them. Parmi, when you saw this question, what did you think?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question. I was so torn a little bit on the answer, create more jobs than it eliminates, because one thing you often hear from tech leaders is they make comparisons to the Industrial Revolution and the boom of the internet around the early 2000s. And in both cases, jobs were lost, but a whole bunch of new jobs were created, like, social media manager, data analyst, software developer, all those kinds of things. In this case, in this kind of new age of AI, I'm a little more skeptical that it's going to create many more jobs than it eliminates, because this is a boom really underpinned by the idea of efficiency gains and cutting back and potentially eliminating roles much more than, say, the internet, the .com boom was, which was much more of an era of creating and designing new features for this new web. So yeah, that was a true. I don't think it will necessarily eliminate my job as a columnist, because I think people.
Nobody ever says it will. Everyone always says that.
Right? So the obvious answer. I mean, I guess a ChatGPT could just spit out a column, but it can't knock on doors. It can't pick up the phone and call people. And so I think for a lot of us journalists, that is the thing that really sets us apart, is the color we can get and the experience that we have going to a conference or meeting someone. And that's just something you can't replicate. I don't see that being something large language models can replicate.
Catherine, you've done a bit of writing, haven't you, on some of the kind of productivity questions. And that, I guess that speaks to this option here of replace most repetitive office tasks. That does certainly seem to be almost one of the short-term goals of AI before we even get to this world of artificial general intelligence or super intelligence, whatever you want to call it. Do you think that's something feasible in 10 years, that most repetitive tasks will be automated or just made easier in some way?
So I think the key word is repetitive tasks. But to be honest, when I took this quiz, I actually didn't select any of them. I think that the hope is that they will be able to replace repetitive office tasks. But as you mentioned, Dave, I did recently write about this phenomenon of work slop, as it's called, which is basically, we've all encountered AI slop on the internet and especially in our social media feeds. And it's really that sort of uh, really kind of trash AI generated content. And there's been some new research that suggests that's actually creeping into our work products too, and thus it's called work slop. And I wrote, as you just pulled up, I wrote about this case in Australia with Deloitte Australia, which basically the consulting firm was forced to partially refund the government for a report that featured these apparent AI generated errors. And it really made international headlines and seemed to really strike a nerve because, AI is supposed to make us all more productive. That's really what's propelling the hundreds of billions of dollars of spending in this. But at the same time, the jury's kind of out on how much it's actually impacting people at the workplace. There was that viral MIT study that we all saw about 95% of firms haven't seen a return on investment on AI. And so we're trying to sort of figure out what's causing that sort of conflict. And one reason that researchers have seen is really this work slop, which is just AI generated content that sort of seems like it's, valuable work, but it's actually not really moving the needle. And I
Right.
think we're all kind of seeing more of that. And I think that it really lacks substance. I think that it really kind of calls into question some of the current limitations of AI, and especially in the workplace. So for that reason, I think we'll have to see how this all plays out. We're still like very in the very early days, but I remain kind of skeptical.
I saw a great comic strip recently where one person was on their computer and they said to their colleague, "Look, I can use AI to turn my sentence into a long email for people to read." And then they sent the email, and the person who received the email said, "Look, I can use AI to summarize this long email I've just got into one line so I can understand it." And I wonder if a lot of AI work slop, which I love the phrase work slop as well, is kind of about that, right? It's about sort of making us look like we've done more work for our colleagues to do, but really, is it adding to our skills? Is it adding to the task at hand? I mean, it seems like it's more as if the computer's replacing busy work as opposed to real work, maybe. Catherine, you said you didn't you said no for all four of them. If the time horizon was 20 years, would that change, do you think, or is this something you don't think really can be solved at all?
So if we want to go back to the quiz, I think um, eliminate the job you have now. I'm hopeful that it can't take, my voice away. And as Parmi mentioned, sort of the human job or the human aspects of our jobs. Create more jobs than it eliminates. 20 years. I I remain skeptical. I mean, I think it will definitely benefit a lot of people who are invested in this, but I don't know if it'll necessarily. I don't know if that'll necessarily, be sort of widespread across the whole labor market. I might click replace most repetitive office tasks with the emphasis on sort of repetitive work that the machine can sort of learn how to do and pick up and actually sort of do well. Be smarter than most experts in the field in specialist fields. This is definitely something that we hear a lot, and Sam Altman says, but I'm not sure. What about you,
Yeah.
Parmi or Dave?
Yeah, Palmy, what do you think in terms of specialist fields within 20 years? Let's put the time horizon a bit further.
Yeah, I definitely I ticked that because I think already people are using ChatGPT and other large language models instead of going to experts. I think that's really one of the trade-offs of this is that consultants or healthcare specialists, nutritionists, personal trainers, all those kinds of people who you might hire, they have billable hours. That's how they make their money. I think that kind of business is perhaps threatened by this because these general purpose models have that same kind of expertise at your fingertips, and it's free unless you pay a subscription. It's significantly cheaper.
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of interesting that study or the company that got into trouble with using AI was Deloitte, which obviously makes a lot of its money from being these kind of consultants and so forth. I guess one way to prepare for the working world would be to have students know how to use AI, be proficient at it. But I do think it's an interesting question, and it's the next one on our quiz here. At what point do we bring AI into schools? Does the sanctity of learning mean anything? Is AI just kind of like debating whether to use a calculator or not, which I know when I was growing up, my dad said I shouldn't use a calculator at school. Seems ridiculous. Catherine, what do you think here? I mean, I think this is a really loaded question for a lot of people, but where should we be bringing in AI in school, if at all?
So I really feel for teachers and educators right now. They have a very hard job and a very important job, and I feel like AI is making their jobs a lot more difficult in a lot of ways. I had selected high school just because I think realistically, whether teachers want it or not, whether educators want it or not, I think a lot of anecdata and surveys sort of suggest that kids are already using tools like ChatGPT to do their homework assignments. And I think, realistically, advanced high school levels, they can sort of understand sort of the process and sort of the critical thinking that you need to do that. But at the same time, I was a little torn, and I do think that there's no long-term studies and no long-term sort of data that we can rely on at this point to really understand how AI impacts learning and, if it atrophies part of our brain, as some people and some teachers seem to think. So it's really hard to know, but I also think that we can't really turn a blind eye and just pretend that it, isn't there and doesn't exist. And that's not really doing a service to students these days.
Yeah, kids are going to find a way. Parmi, you have children. How do you feel about them learning AI, using AI to study? What's your view?
Well, so I selected middle school because I think, first of all, these language models can be incredibly useful as personalized tutors for kids if used the right way. So that's the opportunity. The cost is cheating. And schools can deal with that with flipped learning. So you don't give homework for the child to write an essay. They read when they get home, they assimilate information. And then at school is when they write the essay. That's one way of dealing with it. I think there might be other ways as well. But I feel like the opportunity is high enough that it is worth introducing it. Not necessarily general purpose models, but specialized apps like educational AI apps that are like Khan Academy. I know was one of the first to start working with ChatGPT. I have a 15-year-old who refuses to use AI. I don't know if she's using it on the sly without telling me, but she's
that feels rare,
generally
isn't it?
Totally. It's very strange, and she's trying to study science and chemistry and biology, and she's really struggling with it. And I'm frustrated because I'm like, it would be so great if you could just use Claude or ChatGPT to kind of like talk you through some of this stuff, but she flat out refuses. And I actually think it's an opportunity. I don't think it's general purpose models are necessarily good for this, but maybe we need to wait for more educational focused, tutoring focused AI tools to go mainstream.
Yeah, much narrower, so it doesn't sort of go off into ChatGPT territory, but it sort of deals with the course material. We've had a question from Instagram,
Exactly.
which I'm going to grab now, because I think it relates to this, but also the broader debate. When we're talking about these applications, particularly in education, the biases that are in AI as a result of the data that they've been used to train on. How do we solve that? And I guess with education, how would you ever have confidence, Parmi, that when your children are using this, that the AI they're using is fair and it's balanced? I mean, is there a way to achieve that or not?
Regulation. It's very difficult to do this without regulation that forces tech and AI companies to disclose what data they are training their AI models on. And that's it, basically. We know that these models are biased, but we can't scrutinize them. Third-party researchers, academics, campaign groups, they cannot scrutinize these models because OpenAI, surprise, surprise, it's actually not open. They're incredibly closed and opaque. And until we have some kind of law or regulation that compels these companies to reveal that data, we're not going to be able to address the biases.
I'm going to skip forward a few questions because we've already talked for longer than I imagined. So we're going to go to question 7 here, which it has been a divisive one, just in my own mind, but also people I've spoken to. And I'll read it if people are watching on mobile and can't quite see it. It says, AI is going to create more demand for energy. Where should that energy come from? And the options are any available source, so just do it as quickly as can. AI takes priority. The second option is use fossil fuels temporarily until cleaner fuels are available. And then the final one is, if you can't use clean energy, don't do it. AI isn't worth abandoning our climate goals. Catherine, I think what's interesting about this one is that, I'm sat here in the US, Palmy's in Europe, and maybe the attitudes there in terms of how quickly to build this stuff might be slightly different to what's going to be possible in China, especially. So from your sort of region over there, how does this question play out in your mind?
So one thing that I think is really interesting is that the energy question isn't so much of an issue in China. I mean, obviously, data centers demand an incredible amount of power, but the Chinese government has been investing very heavily in clean energy to support the grid in a way that the U.S. really hasn't, and especially under the current administration. There was one report I was reading that said China had installed, I think it was 10 times the amount of solar capacity in gigawatts just in the first half of this year compared to the US.
Wow.
Don't quote me on that. At least 10 times. I will triple check.
A lot more than the US, is safe to say, yeah.
Yes. And I think even I was reading how Anthropic had actually pointed out that this disparity in power capacity between the US and China was very concerning. And I think that's something, I think we'll see this difference sort of coming up more and more and making a bigger impact really in this AI race in the long run. And then, just personally, real quick, I had selected AI is not worth accelerating climate change for. That's sort of my opinion, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think.
Palmy, what do you think?
I did the same. I don't buy this notion that if we accelerate AI, we'll get the answer to solving climate change, because we'll create software that's smarter than us, and it will solve this intractable problem of where to get energy from. There's no evidence of that. What we do have evidence of is climate change. So why not just address the thing we know for sure is happening and not take that risk? So yeah, I totally agree.
And of course, we have policies that we know would help against climate change, but particularly in this country, collectively we've decided not to follow them through, right? So I guess
the US is a special case, isn't it?
Well, indeed, but I mean, if AI says, okay, here's a new solution to climate change, this is what you should do, I don't think there's any evidence that we'd perhaps follow that advice, given what progress has happened.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
Just to say, I am following chat on TikTok. If you're on there, you can chat away. I'll see what everyone is saying. Lots of people talking about China and their power consumption. And also, if you're on our other platforms watching this stream, I'm seeing those messages come through as well. So anything that is on your mind, or any, well, tell us how you'd answer the questions. That's going to be very useful to us. Let's press on, shall we? We have some more questions. Question 9, I'm going to go to. I wish we could do them all, because I think they're all really interesting questions. So once we finish this live stream, please do go and try the quiz for yourself. This one's been a real controversial question of late. We've seen lots of stories, really troubling stories about the effects of chatbots, in particular on mental health. So we thought it was crucial to get this question in here, and it's about mental health and what companies should be doing, or what governments should be doing to stop people from becoming too attached, I guess, to AI. And the options here, one is to say that personal relationships with AI isn't a real risk, and that that won't be a problem. Another is that it's up to the individual to make their own choices and to look after themselves. Third option is AI companies must implement effective safeguards, which some of the companies claim they are now doing. And then the final one is, I guess, the most extreme, the most regulated, would be that AI companies should face legal repercussions if their AI bots put people in harm's way, send them down into dangerous rabbit holes, and so forth. Palmy, I know this has been a focus of a lot of your writing recently. Do you want to sort of tell us your approach to this question?
Yeah, so I think companies have a duty of care to their customers and their employees. And here in the UK, we have that enshrined in law, in health and safety law, and recently borrowed that approach to health and safety and applied it to online content. What you do online isn't just speech, it's also behavior. and what you do can also harm people. And I think companies should be liable to the harm that happens on their platform, and sometimes it's significant harm. And what we've seen with chatbots is it's easy to say, well, it is a person's responsibility to manage their own well-being, sure, but we wouldn't say that about cigarettes. Like, there are regulations around cigarettes because they're addictive. And I think what we're seeing with chatbots is they are increasingly being tweaked and evolving to become more engagement based, meaning more addictive. So the latest TikTok clone that OpenAI launched, called Sora. Sam Altman frames this as something that's going to spark a Cambrian explosion of creativity. I completely disagree with that. If that's really what he wanted to do, he would have built something more like Adobe Photoshop, but instead he built something that has an infinite scroll, something modeled on social media mechanics. And the goal clearly is to keep people scrolling. And so I think when that's the incentive, there's a great quote from Charlie Munger, the vice president of Berkshire Hathaway. Show me an incentive and I'll show you an outcome. And if the incentive is to keep people scrolling, then the outcome is going to be potential harm. And so I think absolutely these companies need to be liable for that harm if it's designed into the system.
Catherine, I was in South Korea a number of years ago, and what struck me there was how acutely aware of sort of digital addiction and those risks. And this was mainly because of gaming, but I think it still applies here. There was an awareness of that as a crisis among young people in particular. How do you think about this question? And do you think there are different attitudes in Asia compared to the markets that me and Parmi are in?
I think so. And I would just start by saying I completely agree with everything Parmi was saying. I think that was pretty much bang on. And I also selected that, AI companies need to face legal repercussions. There needs to be, hard regulation here. Otherwise, I think we've seen this social media era play out where, tech companies will sort of set their own internal goals, and especially when it comes to potentially harming young people and sort of vulnerable people. And a lot of times we don't find out about, what they know until it's really too late. So I really think that regulators around the world need to sort of get ahead of this trend, especially now that we're already seeing it sort of come up. And so I think, we have enough evidence at this point that we need to sort of really create strong regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one interesting. Sorry.
What's your view? What's your view on that, Dave? I'm curious what your take is.
I agree with you both. I think let me bring the quiz up again so I can see the answer. Hold on. I think AI companies need to take responsibility. The legal repercussions part, I think, is more difficult because I think humans are free people. They're going to use technology in ways that companies may not expect. But I do think there should be an expectation that AI companies do put things in place to protect its users. My big concern is, and I'll bring up the tweet from Sam Altman that's been causing a lot of chatter this week. My big concern is, the companies have a different idea of solving this problem that is perhaps not as solved as some people would think. And I'll read what Sam Altman here said. This was in response to them sort of clamping down some of ChatGPT's functionality because they were worried about mental health impacts. And Sam Altman said, now that we have been able to mitigate the serious mental health issues, we're going to now relax the restrictions in most cases. And that struck me as pretty naive that they seem to have solved or think they've solved this problem in a matter of weeks since some of these stories arose. Parmi, what was your reaction to that? You've written a column about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think basically Sam Altman has done all these kind of circular deals with big companies like NVIDIA, AMD, and United Arab Emirates. He's got big shareholders now that he needs to make whole. And so there's incredible pressure on him to monetize ChatGPT. So obviously you've got Sora with the TikTok clone, and now by including erotic content for users, that is absolutely going to keep people on the app. It's going to help it grow. It's a lucrative business. Chatbots companies who put in restrictions on sexual content lose users. Like Replica used to have millions of users. They decided in February 2023 to get rid of the erotic content. It went down to the hundreds of thousands. It dropped. And the same thing happened to Character AI earlier this year. The opposite happens when you put it in. So I think the hope here is that this is going to be a big, big revenue driver. We saw exactly the same thing with Elon Musk's Grok, which now has these hyper-sexualized anime characters that you can, like, they are explicitly sexual, they're not there to be your friend. And I think it's the same approach. And of course, there's a lot of concern about what that's going to mean if kids use that. Obviously, Sam Altman has said there's going to be age gating, but we don't know how effective that is because we're the guinea pigs. We don't find out until they actually deploy these things to the public.
Yeah, and Catherine, it feels to me that, particularly in the case of OpenAI, they've had an approach, whether it's on copyrighted material where they launched Sora and then a few days later said, oh, actually, sorry, we realize that everyone's stealing images of Pikachu having a fight or footballers doing things. And they sort of do this stuff retroactively. And mental health is probably too serious an issue to sort of learn as you go, to learn on the job and sort of say sorry at the end. I mean, that does seem to be the pattern, doesn't it?
Yes, I completely agree. And, we almost shouldn't be naive to this sort of playbook. I feel like this has been big tech and Silicon Valley's playbook for a while now. And, I mentioned the social media era before, but it does seem like, this time around, I think we should have sort of learned our lessons there. And I think that should really empower policymakers and really lawmakers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're almost coming up on time, but I want to go on back to another question before we duck out. And this is much more about the sort of geopolitical battle. It's great on this team, isn't it? Because we have, I'm here in New York, Palmy's in London, and Catherine, you're in Tokyo, so we get this real sort of spread globally. And one of the biggest questions, is access to technology and whether China in particular has access to American designed chips. And I guess increasingly whether it needs access to American design chips in order to compete in the AI race. And so the question addressing that was, should American chip makers be allowed to sell their best technology to China? And the options were yes, there should be a free trade in semiconductors, or yes, but only in specific circumstances controlled by the US government, or no, because China shouldn't be permitted to attain global AI supremacy, at least not with the help of the US. Catherine, how do you feel about this? What's the view from there on the importance of American chips making their way into Chinese AI companies?
So I guess I just want to start by saying this is a really divisive topic, and I don't think anything I write spurs more heated opinions than export controls, surprisingly, and whether specifically NVIDIA should or shouldn't be allowed to sell its best products to China. And there's a lot of moving parts, and I think nobody has a crystal ball. But I think one of the sort of reasons it's become such a mess is really that AI chips have really become sort of bargaining chips in this trade war, and they didn't necessarily have to, turn out that way. But now we don't necessarily know if Beijing is sort of gunning for a better trade deal with some of the recent chips back and forths that we've seen come out of China. And, NVIDIA, obviously, that's probably the clearest part, the most easy to understand. They obviously want to be in the China market. There's billions of dollars for them to reach. And so I think, in terms of China's chip progress, that's very, very opaque. There's a lot of unknowns. I think it's hard to really know what's going on with Huawei's chip progress, with even players like Cambricon. And there's so much excitement because nobody wants to miss out on becoming the next, NVIDIA millionaire and investing early in companies like these. But Huawei founder, Ron Zhongfei, earlier this year, he came out and said, we're a generation behind the US. And Cambricon had to issue a statement saying, our stock price has deviated from the fundamentals. So, like I said, there's quite a lot of moving parts, but the way I see it is that you can make a convincing argument for global free trade in semiconductors and back that up. You can also make a convincing argument that there should be, basically airtight export controls to China. What I think has become harder to understand is, at least how I see it, is what's been harder to defend is sort of what Washington's approach has been so far, which is I think, been a little bit inconsistent, and it's caused a lot of tension with Beijing, and it's caused a lot of confusion with these American AI companies like NVIDIA. Or excuse me, chip companies. So I really think now would be a good time to reassess what the goal is with export controls, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and really how can we sort of disentangle the trade war from the chip war.
Our producer Christina said we've got a little bit more time, so I'm going to use that because I'm interested in in carrying on this discussion ever so slightly. Pardon me, just on Catherine's point there about the goal here of what these restrictions can do. You know, when you hear Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA CEO, talk about this, he says things like, well, if we don't provide American technology to China and we don't proliferate American expertise around the world, then the AI era, the AI revolution, will be built on a tech stack that's not American. It's more likely to be Chinese or whatever. But of course, at the same time, NVIDIA is sitting on the potential of tens of billions of dollars of sales of chips to China. So which of those two factors do you think is of primary concern? Do you think this tech stack question is legitimate or not?
Yeah, I'm not sure I buy it. I heard that it was really pushed in the Trump administration by David Sachs, and a lot of China hawks ended up getting defeated in that whole debate, which is why NVIDIA was able to continue selling those. It's H100s or the H. Some of it's
H20.
the most powerful. The H20, that's the one. Which are still like quite capable chips to China. Just in the past, we've seen Google, and I mean, like, we're talking 10 years ago. I remember when Google went out to China and they were trying to really pitch their TensorFlow AI system and their cloud service. And in the end, they really went for it. But companies out there were kind of like, they smiled and nodded, and then Google went home to Mountain View. And then guess what happened? Alibaba came up, and Tencent came up, and Baidu, and JD.com, like all these big tech giants in China emerged on their own without U.S. infrastructure, even though it was offered to them on a silver platter. They just didn't want it.
Which is what we're seeing now, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
even though the H20 is allowed to be sold, China said, don't use it.
Yeah, so I don't know that approach is necessarily going to work this time around.
We've got time for one more question. I'm actually going to take a question from Instagram rather than our quiz, and I think it's a question that I hear probably more often than anything else, and it's about the AI bubble. The question is, what are your opinions about the excessive push on artificial intelligence and related companies? This remarkable bull run that all you have to do is mention AI now, and your stock price goes up 20% or so. Catherine, what's your brief take on the sort of bubble moment? Is it even questionable that we're in a bubble now, and what happens next?
I think it's fair to say, and we've been hearing this increasingly, that we are in a bubble. And I think, how big the repercussions of what the end of that will look like are what we seem to be debating now. But I think, when you start to get these sort of circular deals that we've been hearing a lot about, and these sort of new ways of financing that don't really make a lot of sense. And then when you're also just throwing around, trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, it's hard to not see that as some kind of bubble. And I think we'll have to see how this does end up playing out. And there are arguments that it can be a bubble and, still be a transformative technology, which I've seen a lot of people start to say now. I think it is a little bit too soon, but I think it is fair to call it a bubble. And I remember, even 6 months ago or a year ago, people were so afraid of that word, and now it seems to have really sort of taken root.
Yeah, there's an assumption there. We're in a bubble, but there will be survivors, and everyone's convinced they've backed the survivors. I think of Amazon was obviously the big survivor of the .com bubble, and obviously they went strength to strength. Parmin, what you have these conversations with people at that bubble in London, I'm sure as well. Like what's the mood there around that?
I think everybody just accepts we're in a bubble. Yes, we're in a bubble. The question is just, how painful will the correction be? Because there's going to have to be a correction at some point. Will it be kind of like a soft correction, or will it be a horrible burst like the 2008 financial crisis that has all these knock-on effects? And that nobody knows. it'll probably be sentiment related. The market is like very prone to like some sort of news development that makes everybody freak out. We saw a great example of that in January when DeepSeek from China released a model that was as good as ChatGPT, but for a fraction of the price. They put everything on the blueprints on the internet, like just completely sparked this Silicon Valley freak out. And stocks dropped.
It was a freak out, wasn't it? I mean, I remember that day.
Yeah.
There was, honestly, I feel like if I could have looked out the window down at Wall Street, there'd have been people just doing this everywhere, saying, the AI boom is over in America.
Because didn't Nvidia's share price decline like 10% or something?
It was it was their biggest.
It was a big drop. I don't know, that not over the course of one day, but at least over the course of a few days. So something like that, something that kind of affects sentiment. But I mean, the argument I keep hearing is, well, the hyperscalers can afford it. The dot-com boom was financed by debt and venture capital money. This boom is being financed by equity because Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Nvidia, they're all making hundreds of billions of dollars. Google made $350 billion last year in profit. They have huge cash mountains on their balance sheet, so they can afford all the money that's going into data centers. The figure I heard was $3 trillion is what it's going to cost. This is like a JP Morgan estimate. Morgan Stanley, $3 trillion over the next 4 years to pay for all these data centers. Half of that's going to come from the big tech companies. The other half is going to come from debt trading by banks and investment firms. Sure, okay, let's see if that actually does plug that gap. But in addition, we need revenue from the AI companies. Mm-hmm. And actually, if OpenAI does a Sora TikTok clone, that could make a few billion in ad revenue over the next few years. And maybe it could derive even more from subscriptions because of the erotic chatbot, and then the buy buttons that are coming into ChatGPT. We've got a new e-commerce play, the partnership with Walmart. But even if their revenue grows by into the double-digit billions, that's still a fraction of the cost of all this.
Sam was talking about $1 trillion just for OpenAI's computing needs, right? So
yeah,
I don't see how he reaches that with subscriptions of $20 a month for most consumers. And there was the Financial Times had a report yesterday suggesting that 70% of OpenAI's revenue is from consumer, which I think puts them in a pretty risky place because consumers are the most fickle. Chatbots, I think, are quickly becoming commoditized. I don't know. I'd be pretty nervous if I was an OpenAI investor.
Well, that's why the ad opportunity is so huge, because they have 800 million weekly users of ChatGPT. I mean, that could hit 1 billion before 2026. And I mean, look how much money Google makes from advertising, and Facebook makes 98% of its revenues just from ads. So, I mean, that is a business that could absolutely grow quite high, but it's going to take years to get to that point, probably.
Absolutely. Well, we definitely have run out of time now. I'm going to get told off, I think. But it was great to talk over those issues with you both. And for those watching, like I say, please do go and do the quiz. You can find it. There's a link in our bio on various platforms that we're on right now. And also, if you just go to bloomberg.com/opinion, you'll see the quiz is right at the top of that page. You can do it. Find your answer, find out if you're a doomer, find out if you're an accelerationist, find out if you're a pro-human idealist like me. Guys, what did you get? You got the same as me, right? Is that?
We're all pro-human idealists.
Well, I took it again and got cautious optimist, so I'm both those.
So your opinions changed. You changed in the
I changed.
I wonder what caused it. Was it Sam Altman saying he was going to make erotic chatbots?
I don't know. I was just hugely disappointed in Sam Altman. So not an idealist anymore.
I don't blame you. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Catherine and Parmi. Catherine in particular for staying up late there over in Tokyo. And take the quiz. Let us know. We're all on social media. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Parmi.